She had exactly 4 seconds to change her life forever. 4 seconds to walk up to the most dangerous man in Seoul, whisper something into his ear that would either save her life or end it, and disappear before his security could do anything. 4 seconds that she had been planning for 18 months. And she used them perfectly. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Because before Seoul, before the 4 seconds, before Min Jae-kwon, there was Lagos, there was a Thursday night, there was a building that had no idea what was happening inside it. And there was Kamara Okafor, sitting at her desk on the 14th floor of Meridian Financial Group at 11:30 p.m., looking exactly like what she needed everyone to believe she was. A hard-working analyst staying late. The 14th floor was quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens in office buildings after hours. Deep, empty, the cleaners gone home, the security guards on autopilot, nobody paying close attention to anything. Kamara's office light was the only one still on in the entire East Wing. She was sitting in a fitted black blazer, her natural hair pulled back, a half-eaten meat pie on a napkin beside her keyboard that she hadn't touched in 2 hours. Her screen showed spreadsheets, her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard. She hadn't typed a single real word in 20 minutes. She was listening and counting footsteps. The last security guard was making his final round down the East Corridor, and she had been counting those footsteps for 6 weeks. She knew his pace like she knew her own heartbeat. She knew exactly how long it took him to reach the stairwell door, push through it, and disappear down to the ground floor. She knew he wouldn't be back for 40 minutes. The moment she heard the stairwell door close, her hands moved. She reached into her bag and placed a second laptop on the desk. No Meridian sticker, no work history. It was bought for cash from a market in Alaba 3 months ago and never once connected to any traceable network. She opened it and her fingers moved fast, the way a surgeon's hands change the moment the first incision is made. She had rehearsed this so many times in her head that her body moved through it like memory. Accounts shifted and money moved. Not recklessly, precisely. Through 17 shell companies she had spent 18 months building across 9 countries, each one collapsing behind her as the funds passed through it like a bridge that dissolves the moment you cross it. She wasn't dumping the money somewhere obvious, she was placing it inside a structure so complex, so layered, so specifically designed that only she knew how to navigate it. A dead man's switch. If anything happened to her, the money would dissolve permanently and irrecoverably. $4.2 billion, gone forever. She wasn't stealing because she was greedy, she was stealing because it was the only language that men like Min Jae-kwon truly understood. And she needed him to understand her very, very clearly. When it was done, she closed the second laptop and straightened her desk. Then she wrapped the uneaten meat pie back in its napkin and dropped it in her bag. She watered her little pothose plant on the windowsill, kept it alive for 2 years in that office, and picked up her bag and walked out like she was coming back tomorrow. At the front desk she gave the guard a tired smile. "Night," she said. "Night, Miss Okafor," he mumbled without looking up. "Don't work too hard." She pushed through the glass doors into the thick night air of Lagos. The city was loud around her with generators humming, traffic moving, the smell of rain somewhere in the distance. She didn't look back at the building, not once. She never came back. 3 weeks later she was standing in the lobby of a hotel in Seoul's Yongsan district in a simple black dress and small gold earrings, her natural hair out and full around her face, checking in under a name that wasn't hers with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times because she had. She had been preparing this identity for 8 months. Every document was clean and every detail was airtight. The woman checking into this hotel tonight did not officially exist, which meant neither did anything she was about to do. Outside, Seoul blazed the way Seoul always blazes at night, electric, relentless, a city that never fully exhales. But Kamara wasn't thinking about the city. She was thinking about the gala she was walking into in 40 minutes. And the man she had spent 18 months studying from a distance who had no idea she existed. Min Jae-kwon. She had not thought about him the way people think about someone they are drawn to. She had thought about him the way a chess player thinks about an opponent before the game even starts, completely, obsessively, from every possible angle. She had built a full picture of him. His operations, his psychology, his patterns, his history. The financial architecture of the entire Kwon Syndicate empire which had been running under Seoul for 3 generations. She had accessed everything she could find on him, and then she had found the one thing nobody else in Seoul's underworld knew how to use. His grief. 3 years ago Min Jae's younger sister Jeon had been given away in a political marriage arrangement between the Kwon family and a rival syndicate. A peace deal sealed with a human life. Jeon died 13 months into that marriage, officially from illness, unofficially from a husband who treated her like property and a family that chose the alliance over the girl. Min Jae had fought against the arrangement before it happened, but he had been overruled by his own father. He buried Jiyeon and turned himself into something harder than the grief, colder than the loss, and he had never once stopped blaming himself for not fighting harder. Kamara knew that wound the way she knew the walls of her own bedroom in Lagos because she was living the same story. Different city, different family, same cage. Her father, Emeka Okafor, had spent 30 years building a crime empire in Lagos on the backs of strategic alliances, and the currency he used to seal those alliances was family, specifically daughters. Kamara had watched it happen to other women in her father's orbit. Women who were brilliant and alive and full of futures, reduced to signatures on agreements they never consented to. And now Emeka had turned his eyes to her, his most valuable asset, his most educated daughter. The one whose financial mind he had paid to sharpen for years without realizing he was handing her the tool she would one day use to free herself. She had chosen Min Jae-kwon not because he was safe. He was the furthest thing from safe. She had chosen him because a man carrying that specific guilt, a man who watched his sister be sold into an arrangement and couldn't stop it, would understand why Kamara did what she did before she had to explain a single word of it. She was betting her life on a wound she had never seen but recognized completely, because it was the same wound she was still trying to survive. The gala was the kind of event that didn't get photographed. No press outside, no social media. Just old money and older secrets filling a glass building overlooking the Han River, full of powerful men in expensive suits shaking hands over things that would never appear in any official record. Kamara had studied this building's layout for 2 weeks. She knew where every camera was. She knew the security rotation down to the minute. She had mapped every blind spot, every exit, every path through the room that kept her off the lenses she needed to avoid. She signed in at the front entrance under her prepared name, hands steady, smile easy, completely unhurried, and stepped inside. She moved through the crowd the way water moves through a room. No resistance, no announcement, no trail. She had grown up in high-pressure environments. Her father's world was never quiet, and she had learned early that the safest person in any room was always the one nobody was watching. She made herself easy to overlook. And while nobody was watching her, she was watching everything. She found Min Jae-kwon in under 2 minutes. He was standing near the far window with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, half listening to a Japanese business partner while wearing the expression of a man counting the minutes until he could leave. His security flanked him at a professional distance. 2 men, trained eyes, scanning the room with the calm precision of people who knew exactly what real threats looked like. His suit was charcoal gray, his face was sharp and completely still. He looked like a man who had decided a long time ago that the world would come to him, and had been proven right enough times to believe it permanently. Kamara watched him for 4 minutes. She tracked his movement, she timed the security rotation, she identified the exact 12-second window when his nearest guard would turn to redirect a passing waiter, a pattern she had extrapolated from studying footage of 3 similar events he had attended over the past year. She had been waiting for this specific window for 18 months. She felt her heartbeat once before she moved. The collision was clean. His whiskey hit his jacket. She was already apologizing, Josunghamnida, her hand on his sleeve, her eyes cast down, performing the embarrassment of a woman who had just made the most mortifying mistake of her evening. His nearest guard was already moving. 3 steps away too. She had 4 seconds and she used every single one of them. She leaned close, her lips near his ear, her voice so low it existed only in the space between her mouth and his skin. $4.2 billion is bleeding out of your accounts and you don't even know it yet. The coordinates are on the napkin in your jacket pocket. Come tomorrow at 9 a.m., alone, and I will show you exactly where your money went. She straightened, handed him a clean napkin with a small apologetic bow and walked toward the exit at a perfectly normal pace. Not fast, not slow. A woman who had spilled a drink and was now quietly mortified about it. His security moved, but she was already in a taxi. Back at the Kwan Fortress in Yongsan, Min Jae stood in his security room at midnight staring at 6 screens. 47 cameras in that gala building. His team had pulled every feed, every angle, every timestamp from the entire evening. They went through it frame by frame for 2 hours. She appeared on 3 cameras. All 3 at the front entrance. Check-in, coat drop, security scan. Face clear, false name documented, entry time logged. And then she walked into the main event space and vanished completely from every single camera for 40 minutes. Not blurred, not partial, just gone. She had moved through a packed room full of shifting bodies for 40 minutes and avoided 44 cameras without once looking rushed, suspicious, or anything other than a woman enjoying a private event. Min Jae's security chief exhaled slowly. She left the entrance footage on purpose. She wanted us to find the name she signed in with. Min-jae didn't answer. He was looking at the 3 frames where her face appeared. She was looking directly at one of the cameras. Not accidentally, deliberately. The look of a person acknowledging something they have already accounted for. He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded the napkin she had pressed into his hand. Small handwriting with coordinates. A storage unit in Mapo district. And one line beneath it. Come alone or don't come at all. He read it twice, then he looked back at the screen at the woman who had walked into the most dangerous private event in Seoul, delivered the most precise intelligence he had received in years, avoided 44 security cameras, and disappeared into the night without a single traceable footprint. His security chief was waiting for an order. His phone had 3 missed calls from his lieutenant. The whole room was waiting for him to react the way he always reacted, with speed, with authority, with the cold efficiency that had made the Kwon name mean something in this city for 3 generations. He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. Find her real name by morning, he said quietly. But don't touch her. He walked to his office, poured a drink he didn't finish, and sat in the dark for a long time thinking about a woman who had just handed him the most interesting problem he had encountered in years, and had done it in 4 seconds without breaking a sweat. He didn't know yet that she had studied him for 18 months. He didn't know yet that she had chosen him. He didn't know yet that the most dangerous thing she had taken from him tonight wasn't the $4.2 billion. It was his attention. And once Kamara Okafor had your attention, the rest was already decided. Hey, if you are still here right now, I already know you are the right kind of person for this channel. Because this story is only just beginning and it is about to get so much deeper. Before we go further, I need you to do 3 things for me right now. Hit subscribe, because if you leave without subscribing you are going to miss everything that comes after this, and trust me, you do not want that. Hit the like button because it tells YouTube that this story deserves to be seen by more people. And drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. Seriously, Nigeria? Korea? USA? Canada? South Africa? Europe? Somewhere I would never guess? Tell me right now because I want to know exactly where my people are. This community is global and every single comment means something to me. Okay, now let us get back to Kamara, because Min-jae just found out her real name, and everything is about to change. Min-jae Kwon had not slept. Not because he was worried. Min-jae did not worry. Worry was for men who hadn't prepared. He hadn't slept because he was thinking. And when Min-jae Kwon was thinking deeply about something, he went very still and very quiet, and the whole fortress around him seemed to hold its breath without being told to. By 6 a.m. his team had a name. Kamara Okafor, 28 years old, Nigerian national, senior financial analyst currently employed at a mid-level consulting firm in Gangnam District. UK educated, first-class degree in financial forensics from the London School of Economics. No criminal record, no known syndicate connections, no red flags in any databases people had access to. A profile so clean it practically shone. Min-jae read the file twice. Then he looked at the coordinates on the napkin. Then he made a decision that his security chief would later describe as the most uncharacteristic thing he had ever seen Min-jae Kwon do. He went alone. The storage unit in Mapo district was in a quiet commercial block 3 streets from the Han River. Unit 14, the kind of unremarkable gray door that could hide anything or nothing. Min-jae arrived at 8:58 a.m. in a car that didn't have Kwon plates, with one man waiting outside who he trusted with his life and had trusted for 11 years. He told him to stay in the car and went in alone. Inside there was a single table, a laptop, a printed ledger 43 pages long, and a small thermos of coffee still warm. She had been here this morning, recently, maybe an hour ago. He sat down at the table and opened the ledger. What he found over the next 40 minutes made him go very, very still in a way that had nothing to do with calm. The financial trail was meticulous. 17 shell companies across 9 countries. Each one built with such precision that even knowing they existed you could spend months trying to prove it. Every transaction was sized just below the automated flagging thresholds of 4 different international banking systems. Every company had legitimate paper histories, legitimate directors, legitimate tax filings. Whoever built this had not just understood finance. They had understood specifically how the Kwon syndicate moved money internally, the proprietary layering method his family had developed over 15 years and shared with nobody outside the innermost circle of their operation. This trail wasn't built by someone who had studied finance. It was built by someone who had studied him. He closed the ledger and opened the laptop. It was unlocked. One document was opened on the screen with a single page. At the top, her name, Kamara Okafor. Below it, 3 sentences. I know where your money is. I know how it got there. Find me and I will tell you everything, but only if you come to me the same way you came here today, alone. Below the 3 sentences, her address in Gangnam, her cafe, her schedule, down to the time she arrived every morning and what she ordered. She had given him everything he needed to find her, packaged it neatly and left it waiting for him like a gift. He sat with that for a long moment before he called his security chief. I found her, he said. Pull the car around. She was exactly where she said she would be. Corner table, black coffee, laptop open. Her natural hair was out today, full and thick around her face, the kind of hair that made her look softer than she was. She was reading what appeared to be a financial journal, and she did not look up when the cafe door opened. She did not look up when the 2 men in dark coats came in first, scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of people who did this for a living. She did not look up when Min Jae-kwon himself walked through that door for the first time and stood 3 feet from her table. She turned a page. You are 2 minutes early, she said, still not looking up. I would have had your coffee ready. Min Jae looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. You are not afraid, he said. She looked up then. Her eyes were steady and completely unreadable. Should I be? He studied her face. In his experience, people who weren't afraid of him were either very stupid or very prepared. Everything about this woman suggested the latter. You stole from me, he said. I moved your money, she shrugged. There's a difference. Not to me. She closed her laptop and then folded her hands on the table. Mr. Kwon, I didn't bring you here to argue about semantics. I brought you here because you have a problem that is significantly bigger than $4.2 billion, and I am the only person who can solve it for you. You can have me arrested and lose the money permanently. You can have me killed and lose the money permanently. Or you can listen to what I have to say. She tilted her head slightly. You came alone. Which tells me you already know that listening is the right choice. The cafe was quiet around them. A young couple 2 tables away were arguing softly over a shared pastry. The barista was steaming milk. Outside the window, Seoul was already fully awake and moving. None of it touched their table. Their table existed in its own atmosphere entirely. Min Jae leaned back in his chair. He looked at her the way he looked at everything he was trying to fully understand, completely, unhurriedly, without giving anything away. Who are you? He asked. I already told you my name. That's not what I asked. Something moved very briefly across her face at that moment. Not quite a smile, not quite acknowledgement, something in between. I am the person who spent 18 months inside the architecture of your financial empire without you knowing I was there, she said. And I am the person who can tell you exactly how I got in, so you can make sure nobody else ever does. He was quiet for a moment. And what do you want in return? She looked at him steadily. Protection. He brought her to the fortress that afternoon. Not gently, not warmly. With the cold efficiency of a man who had made a calculated decision and was executing it before he could second-guess it. She was collected from the cafe by 2 of his people in an unmarked car and brought to the Kwan Tower in Yongsan, a residential building on the surface, a command center underneath. She was taken to a room on the 8th floor with a view of the river and told to wait. She waited for 11 minutes before Min Jae came in. He stood in the doorway. You will stay here until you find whoever built that trail. He paused. Whoever other than yourself. I built it alone, she said. Then you will stay here until you dismantle it and return what you took. She looked around the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows, river view. A desk that was better than the one she had at Meridian. I'll need a second monitor, she said. And a direct Ethernet connection. The Wi-Fi in buildings like this is never fast enough. He stared at her. She met his eyes without flinching. He turned and spoke quietly to the man behind him in rapid Korean. Get her what she needs, and walked out. She sat down at the desk, opened her bag, took out her laptop and placed it on the desk, then looked at the river through the window for exactly 30 seconds. Then she opened the laptop and got to work. The first person to make Kamara feel like a human being in that fortress was not Min Jae. It was Mrs. Park. Mrs. Park had worked for the Kwan family for 20 years. She was in her mid-60s, with the quiet authority of a woman who had outlasted 3 different versions of this household and expected to outlast several more. She didn't speak much English, but she didn't need to. She communicated entirely through action, through the appearance of clean towels before you knew you needed them, through doors that were always unlocked at the right moment, through food that arrived exactly when your body was about to remind you that you hadn't eaten. On Kamara's first night in the fortress, Mrs. Park knocked on her open door at midnight, placed a covered bowl on the corner of her desk without a word, and left. Kamara lifted the cover. Doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean stew, rich and dark and smelling like something that had been made with actual care. She ate it slowly at her desk without stopping her work. It was the best thing she had eaten in 3 weeks. She didn't know that Mrs. Park had never once brought food to anyone Min-jae had detained in this building. She didn't know that Min-jae, passing her open door at 1 a.m. on his way to his own office, had seen the empty bowl and stood in the hallway for a moment looking at it before walking on. She didn't know any of that. She was just a woman eating soup at midnight in a stranger's fortress, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, something that was dangerously close to not being alone. The first 3 nights had a rhythm that nobody planned but everyone fell into. Kamara worked until 4 a.m. Min-jae worked late in the adjacent office. On the first night he walked past her open door at 2 a.m. and saw her light still on and kept walking. On the second night Mrs. Park left the Dunjang Jigi. On the third night Min-jae came in himself. No announcement, no explanation. He just set a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the corner of her desk, pulled the chair from against the wall, and sat down across from her with his own work. She glanced at the wine then glanced at him. She poured 2 glasses and went back to her screen. They worked in silence for 2 hours. Not the silence of strangers tolerating each other. The silence of 2 people who had both spent so long performing composure for the world that sitting in a room with someone who wasn't asking them to perform anything felt like the most profound relief either of them had experienced in years. Neither of them would have named it that. But it was there, quiet and specific and entirely uninvited, settling into the room around them like the city lights on the river outside. At some point around 2 a.m. Kamara made a small sound. Barely audible, the sound a person makes when their mind hits something it can't immediately get around. Min-jae looked up from his documents immediately. "What did you find?" She shook her head slowly. "Nothing yet. I'm still looking." He nodded and went back to his documents. He didn't actually read anything for the next 4 minutes. On the 5th day his lieutenant put a report on his desk and closed the office door behind him. Min-jae read it standing up. The financial trail, the 17 shell companies, the 9 countries, the $4.2 billion, had been built using a structural architecture that was not publicly known. It was the Kwon family's own proprietary layering system. The internal method they had developed over 15 years for moving syndicate funds. A method that had never been documented outside of 3 people's heads and 1 encrypted internal file that had never been accessed by anyone outside the innermost circle of Kwon operations. Except once. 2 years ago the Kwon syndicate had contracted a legitimate consulting firm for a 3-month financial compliance project. Standard procedure. They used outside firms occasionally to maintain their legitimate business fronts. 1 junior analyst from that firm had been given supervised access to a limited section of Kwon financial records as part of the project scope. The access was controlled, time-limited, and considered low risk. The analyst's name was Kamara Okafor. Min-jae set the report down on his desk and looked through the glass partition at Kamara working quietly at her desk in the adjacent room, head down, coffee at her elbow, completely absorbed, completely unhurried. She had been inside his world 2 years ago. She had spent 3 months learning the specific fingerprint of how his empire moved money. And then she had spent the following 18 months building a trap using that fingerprint so that when he found the trail it would be unmistakably his own architecture reflected back at him. Proof that someone had been inside his house, in a language only he would fully understand. She hadn't just studied his finances, she had studied his mind. He stood at the glass for a long time. His lieutenant was waiting for an order. The obvious order, the order any rational man in his position would give. But he didn't give it. "Double the perimeter," he said quietly. "And don't touch her." His lieutenant left without a word. Min-jae stayed at the glass. On the other side Kamara reached for her coffee without looking up, took a slow sip, and set it back down with the steady precision of someone who had no idea she was being watched. But she did know. She always knew. A week passed. Then another. Nobody in the Kwon fortress said anything about how long she had been there. Nobody asked when she was leaving. Nobody mentioned that what had started as a detention had quietly and without announcement become something else entirely, something that didn't have a clean name yet but that everyone in the building could feel the shape of, the way you can feel a change in weather before it actually arrives. Kamara worked. She ate Mrs. Park's food, she slept in 4-hour increments and woke up already thinking. She moved through the fortress with the quiet self-possession of a woman who had decided, consciously or not, that she was not going to shrink herself to fit inside someone else's idea of what a captive should look like. She was polite to everyone, she learned the names of the security staff, she asked the kitchen about the food they made and listened to the answers with genuine interest. She kept her space immaculate, she was the easiest person in the building to be around. And that was the most unsettling thing about her. Min-jae noticed all of it. He noticed the way his security team had stopped announcing her movements on the internal radio because everyone already knew her schedule without being told. He noticed the way the kitchen had started preparing her coffee before she arrived every morning. He noticed the way Mrs. Park, who had worked for this family for 20 years and had a finely calibrated instinct for people that Min-jae trusted more than most intelligence reports, moved around Kamara with the easy familiarity of someone who had already made up her mind about her. He told himself he was keeping her comfortable because a comfortable person worked better. He told himself that every day. He was lying to himself every day. It was a Tuesday evening, 12 days into her stay, when the first real crack appeared in the wall between them. Kamara was deep in a particularly complex section of the ledger, the kind of financial knot that required holding 17 variables in your head simultaneously while untangling them one by one without dropping any. She had been at it for 3 hours without moving. At some point her body made a small sound, barely audible, the kind of involuntary noise that escapes when your mind hits a wall it can't immediately get around and your frustration leaks out in the only way it can when you are too disciplined to actually express it. Min-jae looked up from across the room immediately. What did you find? She didn't look up. Nothing yet. I'm still inside it. Walk me through where you are. She paused. She had not expected that. She had expected silence or indifference, both of which she had learned to expect from powerful men when they encountered something they couldn't immediately control or quantify. She glanced up at him. He was looking at her with the focused attention of a man who was genuinely asking. Not performing interest, not managing her, actually asking. She turned her laptop to face him and walked him through the section. He leaned forward and looked at the screen and asked 2 questions that were, she noted with a feeling she couldn't immediately categorize, exactly the right 2 questions. He had understood the structure of the problem faster than she expected. After she answered him, he pointed at something on the screen. She looked at where he was pointing and found the knot. She stared at it for a second, then she looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Thank you, she said. It was the first time she had thanked him for anything. It sat in the air between them differently than she intended it to. He leaned back and picked up his documents. Don't mention it, he said. But he didn't actually read anything for several minutes after that. The night she fell asleep at her desk was the night something changed permanently. It was past 3 a.m. She had been working for 19 hours with only Mrs. Park's midnight food and 2 cups of coffee keeping her upright. She didn't plan to fall asleep. She never planned anything that wasn't in the plan. But her body made a unilateral decision without consulting her, and she went under mid-thought, her head on her arms, her laptop still open in front of her, the city lights coming through the floor-to-ceiling window and lying across her face like a blanket someone had placed there gently. Min-jae came in at 3:30 to retrieve a document from the filing cabinet in the corner. He saw her the moment he stepped through the door and he stopped. He stood there longer than he would ever admit to anyone. She looked different asleep. Not softer exactly, more honest. During the day she was always composed, always precise, always a step ahead of whatever room she was in. Asleep she was just a person. A person who was exhausted from carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally, just for this moment, just for these hours, put it down. He retrieved the document and stood at the door for a moment. Then he went back to his own office, took his suit jacket from the back of his chair, came back, and placed it over her shoulders with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake a person who desperately needed to sleep. He turned off the overhead light and left the desk lamp on low so the room wasn't completely dark. Then he walked out and pulled the door almost closed behind him. In the morning she found the jacket folded on her desk. She picked it up, carried it to his office, and hung it on the back of his chair without saying a word. He found it there mid-morning. He sat down in his chair and stayed very still for a moment. Then he opened his laptop and started his day. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them needed to. That same week they ate samgyeopsal together for the first time. It was Mrs. Park's doing. She set 2 plates at the low table in the side room without asking permission from anyone, fired up the tabletop grill, and left without comment. Min-jae came in to find Kamara already sitting at the table, the small tongs in her hand, turning the pork belly on the grill with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. He stopped in the doorway. "You've had this before?" he asked. "A colleague used to take me to a place in Itaewon," she said. She wrapped a piece of perfectly cooked pork in a perilla leaf with a small spoonful of doenjang paste the way a person does when the muscle memory is in their hands rather than their head. "Before I left Lagos I used to dream about the food here." He sat down across from her. "You planned to come to Seoul." "I planned a lot of things," she said. He was quiet for a moment before he took a piece of pork from the grill. Did any of them go the way you planned? She looked at the grill slightly longer than a second. Some of them, she said. They ate in a comfortable silence that felt, to both of them, like something that had been earned rather than fallen into. At some point the silence became conversation, and the conversation moved the way conversations move when two careful people are both paying close attention to what the other one isn't saying as much as what they are. She asked him about the city. He told her about Seoul the way people tell you about places they have complicated feelings for, honestly, with all the love and all the difficulty sitting side by side. And then somehow, the way these things happen when a meal goes long and the night gets quiet and the safe topics run out, he told her about Jeon. Not all of it. Not the parts that still lived too close to the surface to be touched without consequence. Just the edges, just enough. His voice was even and controlled the way his voice was always even and controlled. But Kamara was listening to the spaces between the words, the way she always listened, and in the spaces between his words she could hear exactly how much it had cost him. How much it still cost him every single day. When he finished talking the room was quiet. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't fill the silence with sympathy or with the kind of practiced comfort that people perform when they don't know what else to offer. She just let the silence be what it was, real and his and not something that needed to be fixed. Then she said, she would have been interesting to know. He looked at his food. He didn't trust his voice enough to respond. Not because he was sad, though he was, but because in 15 years nobody had said the right thing about Jeon. Everyone said they were sorry. Everyone said she was taken too soon. Everyone said the things that people say because they don't know what else to say. Kamara had said the one thing that was actually true. That Jeon had been a person, a specific, individual, irreplaceable person, who would have been worth knowing. Not a tragedy, a person. He picked up his glass and took a slow drink. Then he looked at the window. Yes, he said quietly. She would have. 3 days after the Samgyeopsal dinner, Min Jae's security chief placed a report on his desk that made his chest go very still. Kamara had left the fortress 2 nights ago. Not to escape, his perimeter team had tracked her the entire time. She had walked 6 minutes to a convenience store in Mapo district, purchased a prepaid phone for cash, made a single 4-minute call and walked back. She had told Min Jae she had been asleep by 10 p.m. that night. He brought it to her directly. Not with anger, with the measured quiet of a man who had been disappointed before and was bracing, already, for the specific weight of being disappointed again. She looked at him when he came in and she read his face in the way she read everything, immediately and completely. Sit down, she said, and he sat. I called Tund, she said. She didn't look away from him. Not to report my location. Not to give anyone information about you or this building. I called him to tell him to stand down. To tell him I was safe and that coming for me would only get him killed. She paused. I used a burner because I knew your people monitor the fortress lines and I didn't want his number in any system that could be traced back to my father. The room was quiet. She was protecting someone, Min Jae thought. Not betraying anyone, protecting someone. He looked at her for a long moment. The tension in his chest, the specific tension of a man waiting for a betrayal that had not arrived, released slowly like something unknotting. Who is Tun to you? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. He was assigned to protect me when I was 7 years old, she said. He drove me to school. He stood outside my exam halls. He watched my father turn me into a transaction and he couldn't stop it any more than I could. She looked at her hands. He is the only person from that life that I trust. And I was not going to let him walk into your perimeter blind. Min Jae said nothing. He stood up, went to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame and spoke without turning around. Next time you need to make a call, he said quietly, tell me first. Then he walked out. Kamara looked at the door he had just walked through and something moved across her face. Something unguarded and quick that she didn't have time to compose before it was already there. Something that looked a great deal like the beginning of trust. She turned back to her laptop, but she didn't type anything for a while. It was on a cold evening in the 3rd week that Min Jae came back from a late meeting to find Kamara at the floor-to-ceiling window, her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the Han River below. The fortress air conditioning ran cold, it always ran cold, and she hadn't asked anyone for anything to fix that because she never asked for anything she hadn't been given first. He disappeared without a word, then came back 2 minutes later with a thick hinyo blanket, the kind the traditional Korean diving women of Jeju Island used on the coast, heavy and warm and smelling faintly of cedar from wherever Mrs. Park kept them folded. He placed it on the table beside her without making it a moment. She pulled it around her shoulders. Where did this come from? She asked. Mrs. Park keeps them everywhere, he said. A small smile moved across Kamara's face. Not the polite, composed, almost smile she used for the world. A real one, quick and genuine and completely unguarded, the kind that changes a person's whole face for just a second before they remember themselves, and Min Jae saw it. He sat down and looked at his documents and did not read a single word. They stood at the window together after that, side by side, the city spread below them, the river dark and wide and moving. "It's a beautiful city," she said quietly. "It's a dangerous one," he said. She turned to look at him. "Most beautiful things are." He looked back at her and neither of them moved. The moment sat in the air between them, fragile and specific and entirely uninvited, the kind of moment that announces itself by making everything else in the room go quiet. Then her 4 a.m. alarm went off from across the room. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and walked away. He stood at the window for a long time after she left, looking at the river, not thinking about the money, not thinking about the empire, not thinking about any of the things that were supposed to occupy all of the available space inside his head. Thinking about a woman who had walked into his life like a problem he needed to solve and had somehow, without asking permission, without announcing herself, without doing anything as obvious as trying, become the most honest presence he had encountered in years. He didn't have a word for what that meant yet. But for the first time since Jiyeon, he wasn't sure he wanted it to stop. And right there, right in the middle of all of this quiet intensity, "I need to stop for just a second and check in with you. Because if you have made it this far, then you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was built for. Are you feeling this story? Because I am feeling this story writing it. Drop a comment right now and tell me, are you Team Kamara or are you Team Min Jae? Who do you trust more right now? Because I promise you, the answer to that question is about to get very complicated." The wedding fabric was still in Min Jae's office. He hadn't thrown it away or moved it. It sat folded on the corner of his desk, deep burgundy and gold, the kind of color that looked celebratory from a distance and felt like a threat up close. And every time he sat down at his desk he was aware of it the way you are aware of something that doesn't belong in a room but that you haven't found the right moment to address yet. It had arrived 4 days ago. His perimeter team had intercepted the package at the gate, standard procedure for anything addressed to Kamara. He had opened it himself and read the card. One sentence. "Your wedding date has been confirmed. 3 weeks from today." No signature. Just the fabric and the card and the specific weight of a father who was not asking. He had brought it to Kamara personally. She had looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she had turned the card face down on the desk and gone back to her laptop. He had sat down across from her and waited. She didn't speak for almost 2 minutes. "His name is Victor Ade," she said finally. She didn't look up. "My father has been arranging this for 18 months. Victor is a businessman. Lagos and Southeast Asia mostly. He has his own infrastructure. And he has been waiting patiently." "And you?" Min Jae said. She stopped typing and looked up. Her eyes were steady, but underneath the steadiness, just underneath it, in the place where she couldn't fully control what showed, was something that looked like a woman who had been running for a very long time and was very tired of running. "I was not consulted," she said. He looked at the fabric on her desk, then he looked at her. He picked up the card and the fabric and walked out. That night his intelligence team began a full background poll on Emeka Okafor and Victor Ade. He didn't tell Kamara. He didn't explain his reasoning to anyone. He just gave the order quietly and waited for what came back. What came back made him sit alone in his office for a very long time. Emeka Okafor's file was 37 pages long. 30 years of empire building in Lagos. Transportation, construction, import and export, political influence threaded through 3 Nigerian states like roots under concrete. On the surface a successful businessman. Underneath a man who had spent 3 decades using family arrangements as the mortar between his alliances. 2 previous arrangements involving women in his orbit. The first woman had survived but disappeared, completely, in a way that suggested she had help getting out. The second had not survived. The records were buried across 3 different jurisdictions, but Min Jae had people who specialized in finding buried things and they had found enough. Victor Ade's file was 22 pages long and significantly more careful. No criminal record. Not a single official flag in any system. A logistics and transportation empire built across West Africa and Southeast Asia. Import networks through Korean ports that he had been cultivating for 15 years. On paper completely legitimate. Underneath, his logistics infrastructure moved things that didn't appear on any manifest, and his Korean port connections meant he was not walking into Seoul blind. He had infrastructure here already. People here already. Min-jae didn't know the full extent of it yet, but the outline of it was enough to make him understand that Victor Ade coming to Seoul was not a retrieval mission. It was an invasion. He read both files twice before he closed them and sat in the dark for a while thinking about a woman 2 floors below him who had known all of this, had known exactly what was coming for her, and had built the most elaborate escape architecture he had ever encountered rather than simply run because she had understood correctly that running wasn't enough. That the only thing powerful enough to stop what Emeka Okafor and Victor Ade were capable of was something even more powerful. He stood up, walked downstairs and moved Kamara to a room on the 14th floor. Reinforced entry, better positioning, further from every access point. He told her it was a routine security rotation for all building occupants. She looked at him steadily for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the room. For reading the file. For understanding what it meant. For making a decision without being asked." He nodded once and walked out. In the elevator going back up he stood very still and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The specific discomfort of caring about an outcome he couldn't fully control. He didn't like it, but he didn't try to make it stop. Tun Bello had been in Seoul for 19 days. Min-jae's perimeter team had been tracking him for 11 of those days. Ever since a rotation guard reported a man maintaining surveillance on the building from a parked car across the street. Same general area, rotating positions, different vehicles. Different clothing every time. Professional enough to avoid obvious patterns. Not professional enough to avoid Min-jae's people who had been running perimeter security on this building for 8 years and knew every parked car, every regular face, every deviation from the normal visual rhythm of the street. Min-jae's security chief had run the surveillance photographs through every database they had access to and come back with a confirmed identity. Tund Bello, 43 years old, known associate of Emeka Okafor, 20 years of operational history across West Africa and Southeast Asia. The kind of man you sent when you needed something done precisely and quietly and without a trace. The order Min-jae's security chief was waiting for was obvious, but Min-jae didn't give it. Because there was something wrong with the picture. Something that didn't fit the profile of a man who had been sent to retrieve or eliminate a target. Tun Bello was not behaving like a hunter. He was not mapping entry points. He was not studying the building's security rotation. He was not positioning himself for an extraction. He was sitting in rotating positions around the perimeter of the building at consistent intervals. The same intervals, Min-jae realized, that his own internal security team used for a protective watch. Tun Bello was not hunting Kamara. He was guarding her. From the outside. Without being asked. Without being paid. Without any official sanction from anyone. A man who had been sent by her father to retrieve her had instead set up a one-man protective perimeter around the building she was inside and gone dark on his employer for 13 days. Min-jae's security chief was waiting. "Leave him," Min-jae said. His chief looked at him. "He's not a threat," Min-jae said. "Leave him where he is." He walked back to his office and sat down and thought about what it meant that the man Emeka Okafor sent to bring his daughter home had instead chosen to stand guard over her from the street. What it said about Kamara. That she inspired that kind of loyalty in a man whose entire career had been built on having none. What it said about Emeka, that his own weapon had turned in his hand without him knowing it yet. And what it said about what was coming, because Emeka would find out eventually. And when he did, the response would not be to send another Tund. The response would be to send Victor. It was a Wednesday night 3 weeks into her stay when everything in the fortress went quiet in a specific way, the way things go quiet when something is about to happen that can't be taken back. Min-jae had been standing at the window for 20 minutes. The city below was doing its usual relentless thing, bright, loud, indifferent to anything happening above it. Kamara was at her desk behind him. He could hear the rhythm of her typing, steady, precise, the specific sound of a mind working at its full capacity. He had come to know that sound the way you come to know sounds that are always present in a space you inhabit, without deciding to learn them, without meaning to, just through the accumulation of days. He had something to say. He had been carrying it for several days and it was getting heavier rather than lighter, the way things do when you keep deciding to put them down and pick them back up without ever setting them somewhere permanent. He turned around. She looked up from her laptop at exactly that moment, the way she always seemed to register his attention before he'd announced it. Her eyes found his across the room. The city light was behind him. Her desk lamp was on. The room was quiet. He opened his mouth. She slid a file across the desk. "I finished," she said. He crossed the room, picked up the file, stood at her desk and opened it and began to read. The room was very quiet. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. His face didn't change. His breathing didn't change. Only his eyes moved, steady and fast across the pages, and in the set of his shoulders, in the particular stillness of a man whose mind is moving significantly faster than his body, something shifted. He reached the last page before he closed the file and set it down on the desk. He looked at her. "It's you," he said. "Yes," she said. The words sat in the room like something physical. He didn't move, she didn't move. Outside the city hummed its indifferent hum. Inside the room everything was very still. "Before you decide what to do with that," she said quietly, "let me show you something." She turned her laptop to face him. On the screen, an account structure. 7 jurisdictions, 17 layers. A financial architecture of extraordinary complexity that she walked him through slowly and clearly, the way she walked through everything, without drama, without performance, just precise and honest and complete. The dead man's switch. $4.2 billion sitting in a structure that only she could navigate. If anything happened to her, anything at all, any interruption to the specific sequence of actions she performed every 72 hours to keep the account active, the funds dissolved. Permanently and irrecoverably. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished he was quiet for a long moment. "You built this before you made contact with me," he said. "I built it over 3 years," she said. "I made contact when it was complete. You chose me deliberately." "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him. Not away from him, not at the desk, not at the window. At him. "Because I spent 18 months studying you and I concluded that you were the one person in the world most likely to understand why I did this before I had to explain it, and I was right." He looked at the account structure on the screen, then looked at the file on the desk, and then looked at her. "The protected list," he said. "Who is on it?" She reached forward and scrolled down on the laptop screen. He looked at the list. His eyes stopped moving. His name was on it. Not at the bottom. Not as an afterthought. Midway down, added, according to the timestamp beside it, 6 weeks ago. Before the Samgyeopsal dinner. Before the blanket. Before the window. Before almost everything. He looked at the timestamp for a long time. 6 weeks ago, he said. Yes. We had been in the same building for less than 2 weeks. Yes. Why? She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke her voice was even, but underneath the evenness, in the place she could never fully control, was the sound of someone saying something true that they had not planned to say out loud. "Because by then I already knew that if anything happened to you it would matter to me," she said. "And I don't make decisions based on feelings. I make them based on what I know. So I added your name." The room was completely silent. He closed the distance between them slowly. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. Just a man crossing a room toward something he had been moving toward for weeks without admitting it. The way you move toward the only warm light in a dark building, not because you decided to but because the alternative stopped making sense. He stood in front of her. He looked at her, this quiet, precise, exhausted, extraordinary woman who had spent 3 years building the most complex protection architecture he had ever encountered and had somehow, in the middle of all of it, found room to put his name on a list that kept him safe. "You didn't just steal my money, Kamara," he said quietly. "You stole the only thing I had left to lose." She looked up at him. She had no calculated response ready. For the first time in 3 years she wasn't running a calculation. She wasn't 3 steps ahead of the moment. She was just in it, completely, unguardedly, without a plan, and it felt like the most terrifying and the most honest thing she had experienced in as long as she could remember. She didn't step back. Morning came to the Kwan fortress the way it always did, quietly through floor-to-ceiling windows. Seoul was already awake below. Already moving, already indifferent to everything that had happened on the 14th floor the night before. Mrs. Park brought 2 cups of coffee to the office without being asked. She set them on the desk, one on Kamara's side, one on Min-jae's, with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had decided something and was expressing that decision through action the way she expressed everything. She didn't look at either of them. She didn't need to. She walked out and pulled the door almost closed behind her, and that was that. Neither Kamara nor Min-jae commented on the 2 cups. That was its own language, one they were both becoming fluent in. Later that morning Min-jae made a quiet call to his legal team. He wanted Kamara registered as a senior financial consultant within one of the Kwan Group's legitimate affiliated firms. Proper documentation, sole residency status, legal standing that would make her significantly harder to touch through any channel, official or otherwise. He didn't announce this decision to anyone. He didn't explain his reasoning. He gave the instruction the way he gave all instructions. Once, clearly, and with the expectation that it would be handled. The paperwork appeared on Kamara's desk by early afternoon. She picked it up, read every page slowly and carefully the way she read everything, completely missing nothing. Then she picked up a pen and signed every single page without hesitation. She tapped the stack into a neat pile and slid it back across the desk toward him. No thank you, no performance, no words at all. Just a woman who had spent 3 years building an exit from one world, signing herself into another one, deliberately with her eyes open, and trusting the man across the desk enough to mean it. Min-jae picked up the signed papers. He looked at them for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called his legal team back. Process it today, he said. Outside the fortress, Tun Bello received a message. Emika's final instruction, direct, unambiguous, the kind of message that meant the conversation was over and the decision had already been made. Retrieve her or confirm termination. This is my last communication on this matter. Tun read it twice. He sat with it for a long time in the driver's seat of a car parked 3 streets from the Kwan Tower, the morning light coming through the windshield, Seoul moving around him in its usual relentless way. He thought about Kamara at 7 years old making him that beaded bracelet from her mother's jewelry box, pressing it into his hand with the serious gravity of a child who wanted him to know she was grateful he was there. He looked at the bracelet on his wrist. He had worn it for 35 years. He had never taken it off. Not once. He typed back 4 words. Operation is compromised. Done. He removed the SIM from the phone. He dropped it in a drain on the street outside. He walked into Itaewon, the district where African and Korean communities had lived alongside each other for decades, where nobody asked too many questions about where you came from or what you had left behind, and he disappeared into it like a man who had been planning that particular disappearance for longer than he knew. He was done with Emika Okafor. He was done with all of it. For the first time in 20 years, Tun Bello was accountable to nobody. It felt like putting down something so heavy that your body didn't know what to do with the absence of the weight at first. He walked through Itaewon slowly. He bought a cup of coffee from a street vendor. He sat on a bench and drank it and watched the city move and felt, quietly, unexpectedly, in a way he wouldn't have had a word for if anyone had asked, something that was close enough to free that the difference didn't matter. Emika Okafor read Tun's 4 words and set his phone down on his desk in Lagos. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that powerful men go quiet in when they are recalibrating, when one plan has closed and another is already opening in its place. He was not panicking. Emika Okafor had not panicked in 30 years. He was thinking. He picked up a different phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 8 months. The man who answered was Victor Ade. Emika kept it simple. Kamara was being held in Seoul by a Korean syndicate. She was there against her will. The arrangement stood. Recovering her was a matter of family honor, and Victor's patience and investment deserved to be honored. He gave Victor the name of the syndicate and gave him the district. There was a pause on the line. Then Victor said, "I'll handle it." 3 words. Quiet and certain. The tone of a man who had been waiting a long time for permission to move and had just received it. Emika ended the call. He leaned back in his chair. He looked at Kamara's childhood photograph on his desk, a small serious-faced girl in a yellow dress looking directly at the camera with eyes that were already, even then, seeing more than most people would be comfortable with. He looked at it for a long time. "Come home and WM," he said quietly to the photograph. He genuinely meant it, and that was the most terrifying thing about Emika Okafor. He always genuinely meant it. In Seoul, Min-jae's lieutenant placed a decoded intelligence report on his desk at 11 p.m. and left the room without a word. Min-jae read it standing up. Victor Ade's Korean port connections, 15 years of logistics infrastructure running through Incheon and Busan, were significantly deeper than the initial file had suggested. Not just shipping contacts. Not just business relationships. Victor had people embedded in Seoul. Security contractors, former military. People who knew this city's geography, its rhythms, its pressure points. People who had been here for years operating quietly under legitimate business covers. People who were, according to the intelligence report, already receiving communications from a Lagos number that had gone active again in the last 6 hours. Victor Ade was not coming to Seoul. Victor Ade was already here. Min-jae set the report down. He stood very still for a moment, not with fear, not with panic, but with the specific recalibration of a man who has just discovered that the game he thought he was playing has significantly higher stakes than he understood. Then he walked downstairs to the 14th floor. Kamara looked up from her desk when he came through the door. She read his face in under a second the way she always read everything, immediately, completely, missing nothing. Her eyes went to the report in his hand. He held it up. "Did you know about this?" he said. She looked at the report. Something moved across her face, Not surprise, not fear, something more complicated than both. The look of a woman doing a rapid calculation and arriving at an answer she had hoped she would have more time before reaching. She looked back at him. "How long do we have?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. Somewhere in Seoul, Victor Ade's people were already moving, and neither of them knew yet exactly where or how many or how fast. "Not long enough," he said. The room held that answer for a moment. Then Kamara set down her pen. She closed her laptop. She looked at Min-jae with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who had spent 3 years running a plan and had just reached the moment where the plan ran out and something else. Something less calculated, something more human, something that had been building quietly in this fortress for weeks, was going to have to take over. "Then we need to start," she said. He looked at her. For just a moment something moved across his face, something that in another life, in a simpler story, might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes," he said. "We do. The architect always builds an exit. She just didn't plan to use it alone. And that, right there, is where we leave them." I know. Don't come for me in the comments. I promise you part 2 is coming, and when it does, everything you think you understand about this story is going to get turned completely upside down. Victor Ade is in Seoul. Tund is somewhere in 81. Emeka is moving pieces on a board he thinks he still controls. And Kamara and Min-jae are standing on the edge of something neither of them has ever done before. Fighting for something together instead of alone. If this story did anything to you today, if it made you feel something, if it kept you watching, if there was even one moment where you forgot to breathe, then please hit that like button right now, because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who deserve to find stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, because part 2 is going to need you there from the very first second. And drop a comment and tell me, what was the moment that got you? Was it the jacket? The blanket? The protected list? The final line? Tell me below, because I read every single comment and your response to this story means everything to me. Thank you for watching. Seriously, thank you. You didn't have to stay for an hour. You chose to. And that means more than I know how to say.